All right, so good afternoon and welcome to our special DEI event on diversity action plans. And this is going to be an interactive learning lab. So I just wanted to go over some of the general housekeeping just to keep you informed. First of all, everybody comes in automatically muted. So just be aware that you're muted right now. It's usually just to keep the background sound out, but that does not mean we don't want to hear you speak. So we do encourage a lot of discussion today. So when it's time, please feel free to unmute yourself so we can have these important discussions. If you have any questions as we're talking before we get going on the discussion, please feel free to either unmute yourself and ask or to drop the question in the chat. We're happy to help you with anything you have going on. If you have any tech stuff, you can send me a message. I can help you with that. So today's learning lab, again, is being facilitated by our good friends here, Winslow and Libero. And Libero is he's a senior organizer at the Alliance for a Just Society, and Winslow, of course, is our senior director for strategic change for CAP. So at this time, I'm just going to go ahead and hand it over to them.
Thanks, Leslie, and welcome everybody. So hopefully we might have more. We did have more folks who are coming in, so we'll hopefully see people pop in. But just to give a quick background on this session, for many of you probably already know, we did a strategy session on principles of practice, how to take diversity, equity, and inclusion principles and move them into practice around the work that we do with our agencies. One of the focus areas that we picked was really developing an action plan for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that was a session that we had, and folks who attended that session said, hey, we certainly like a follow-up session on folks who are actually digging in on their plans. So this is actually a learning lab. So this is not necessarily a longer presentation or a second phase of that, but we wanted to just answer your questions and make this more interactive. So today's session will be, we'll spend a little bit of time doing some brainstorming, and then Libero is going to present the results of the survey that came back once we did the last session. And after that survey review, we're going to do some breakout groups. So it's really an opportunity for you all to kind of dig in, ask the questions that are specific to your agency, that are specific to where you are in your plan. And then we'll come back from that, debrief kind of what we learned, and then wrap up with some extra resources. So again, this is more to give you more of a sense of how to dig in on your plans and kind of go from there. So I'm actually going to jump right into the whiteboard, which is what we wanted to do around the kind of getting your thoughts on where things are. And this is a chance for you to kind of give us a sense of where you are. So I'm going to share my screen. And can everybody see this? Yes, okay. And you're free to unmute. It's a smaller group, so we can hear everybody. But take a look at the questions that we had up front. One of the things is, what challenges are you facing in preparing your plan? What supports are most helpful for you in your preparing your plan? What would you like to get out of today's session? And then what else comes up for you in this session? Like, in other words, what else is coming up for you as we talk about these plans? Wanted to take some quick notes from folks so we can get a sense. Anybody see anything they want to respond to? I'll take some notes and we'll get it going. Where is, let's see, Rebecca's. I know Rebecca's here. Ben, did you have any quick questions on where things are?
Let's see here. I'm still kind of taking in. So is what you're looking for right now anything within challenges, supports, goals?
Yeah, just to give us a sense of where you are.
Oh, yeah. Okay, awesome. Yeah, so kind of from the first session, I'm fairly new to my role, so 3 months in. And so my kind of vision was really just creating good relationships within my organization, and then kind of taking a survey within Beaver County as a whole, who else is having these conversations, whether that's organizations, individuals, and starting to make those connections as well. So I've been doing a lot of that groundwork, specifically doing site visits with any organization that's funded through CSBG. And then I've also been recruiting for our advisory board and really trying to have a vision of diversity, equity, and inclusion as it pertains to that. I know we have the tripartite, board that's structured within CSBG, but really trying to put that, into action, from a DEI perspective as well.
Okay.
So I guess that's where I'm current in terms of questions more. It's just, the big question I'm asking is how to continually invite others into this. And so inviting, folks, and just like what that looks like, a good invitation.
And when you say invite more folks in, do you mean into the field of DEI or the process of doing an action plan specifically?
Yeah, I would say into the field of DEI first. And then I think maybe, a couple months down the line into the action plan specifically.
Okay, all right. Anyone else? Anyone had any other thoughts or things that they wanted to contribute as we get started? Mia, did you want to share anything?
Yeah, sure. So I wasn't at the first meeting because I am also new to my role. I only just came in mid-April, but NISCA, at the behest of the New York State Network, had asked to start a social justice committee. And that started around January. And then they have monthly meetings. And I came in on their fourth meeting in April. And generally, I came in going, what is your intention with a social justice committee? That is quite broad. And they were trying to narrow it down. They were trying to narrow down what they could actionably do. And the biggest challenge I think they're facing is that people are coming into the committee at completely different stages in their understanding of what DEI work is. So there are folks who are very invested, but don't really know where to start. And there are people who are like, wait, I cannot even have tough racial question or conversations at this time, like maybe a training and stuff. So there's a little bit of conflict between people who want to do things and people who want to feel their way through, and getting everyone sort of at a level of comfort and like the same kind of communication plane and idea of what is going to move forward. So right now, I was looking towards using this to sort of help myself kind of figure out where to go from transitioning to getting this group cohesion together within the committee, and like on the same page to basically around, I'm thinking October or the new year is when we will actually be going more towards examining policies, because it's a lot. Like if not everyone is in the same place in terms of how to even talk about what the problem is, like we're just going to go into fixing these problems the wrong way.
Okay. We can certainly share some of that as we kind of go through today. And I think you get the sense already that this session was actually more specific to DEI action planning, but I want to make sure we can answer and address some of those things that you have. So we'll be sure to do that. So thanks for sharing that. Is Rebecca still on? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm here. And I got a question. Yeah.
Okay.
One of the things, like, what challenges are you facing preparing a DEI action plan at the agency? In terms of planning, it's sort of related to what Mia was talking about, but like what it looks like to me is that the agency is very theoretically committed to DEI, but I'm the only person doing it. And there have been some struggles about committing time to even having conversations about it. So I am interested in thinking about what, like in a situation like that, what is a good first step other than trying to get buy-in from people through sort of like whatever communication I can figure out how to get. Like if I'm supposed to, because what the setup is sort of that I'm supposed to make the plan by myself, which in my experience doesn't really work, but is kind of the setup I'm in. So thinking about what steps are good first steps in that kind of a context.
Okay. And I know, Rebecca, you and I talked about this before, so we'll certainly be able to dig in on that a bit more. And I know that Libero has a bit more, maybe expertise in that particular question. So we'll be sure to do that. I can't see anyone else, Leslie, but did anyone else join, or is it still just this group?
There's a couple more. Toby.
Okay.
If you go to the list of like the faces you can see, if you go down, you'll be able to see more faces.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right.
Lori's
welcome,
here.
welcome everybody. Thanks for joining. Did you all want to add anything, or did you see any questions that you wanted to respond to, or at least share what you hope to get out of the session today? Here's Rochelle. Hi, Rochelle. Any other thoughts that you wanted to add specifically?
Just to jump in, it'd be also interesting to hear, last time we heard a lot about barriers, that there was sort of commitment, but that there were barriers. Are there particular barriers that people have found in doing this work or kind of moving forward on commitments?
Okay. Thanks, Libero.
So I can, so this is one, I don't know where actually it falls, but I love a strategy. So we have a really great group, but we've had some people on our group ask, how do we engage more men in the conversation? And I don't know that answer. And so we always put it out there, you're welcome to join. And, we've even like asked or tasked, some of the directors with asking their staff who's maybe predominantly male, if they can try to get some interest, but I would love if there's any strategies, and maybe there's not, and that's okay. So like I said, we have a great group. It's just, I know that's something that's come up in our conversations, because we have, I think 12 females, I think, and one male.
Okay. And Rochelle, you mean the conversation around just DEI in general, or is that right?
No, this is just on our actual social justice task force.
Oh, on the task force. Okay.
So we are kind of the group that's, kind of coordinating the agenda around DEI in our agency.
Okay.
And so we're the ones who are kind of putting out projects. We are doing a pretty big Juneteenth event in our community. So those kind of things.
Okay, great. So we can share some of that. Maybe Libero and I, because we're males, maybe we do we have a little bit of insight on that. All right. Any other thoughts before I turn it over to Libero? Lori, let's see, some other folks who are joined. I can't see pictures if anybody wants to share their screens or anything, but if not, I will stop sharing here and turn it over to Libero to share just kind of what came out of the last session, and maybe this will kind of prompt more thoughts and questions.
So it's great to see everyone who was here last time and to see some new faces. I'm just going to share a screen real quickly. For those of you who were here last time, we did a little quiz at the end to identify where people were at. One of the things that we talked about was that this diversity, equity, and inclusion, especially on race, but on other issues, that this is a path. It's not a destination. This is not something you do once and you're done. And we wanted to recognize and acknowledge that everyone is on the path in a different place, that different people and different organizations are in different places. So I wanted to reflect back to folks some of the results of the survey, that just to show that there is some diversity. Most of you are kind of moving along. You're not just getting started, but you're not really rolling. You've done some things successfully. You're challenged by other things, but there's a big chunk that are just getting started, and that this is new. And I think that this was important just to acknowledge and reflect back, not to say that no one is in the wrong place, but being on the path wherever you're at is important, and to know that your capacity and ability to engage in certain things is different depending where you are on the path. You have to walk before you run, and you can't do really advanced things if you're just getting started. And so that's one thing I want to reflect back. Another thing was that sort of around equity plans. We talked about equity plans, and we had a large number of folks didn't have a plan, and that's okay. We wanted to just say that this is where people are at, so that folks know that folks are still developing these plans, and that's something that we're hoping we can help with today, and that Winslow and others can help over the long haul. And lastly, about follow-up and help from CAP, that the majority of folks said, yes, we would love assistance in this process. That, again, this is not something you can just do on your own. We've noticed that a lot of agencies have hired outside consultants and other things that can be very helpful. But we also think that people are going to learn from each other in these kinds of settings, that sometimes someone else has answered a question that you're struggling with. Sometimes you have knowledge that you don't know you have that others may find useful. And that hopefully CAP as a network can provide resources and support. And that's really what Winslow and the team there is for. So that was just a brief way to reflect back to everyone what we heard and what we saw in the last session. And I think just from what I heard today, I think these will be good things going into the bulk of the meeting today, which is going to be really hands-on. People said we're starting in different places. We have different language. We have different needs, different understandings of the problem. Like, how do you deal with that? I heard that there was questions of commitment of resources, commitment of time, commitment of money, sort of a value commitment, and yet maybe not a programmatic commitment. Like, how do you handle that? And then also these different barriers, both men specifically, but I think anyone, the question is like, how do you go from, we have a DEI person to like, this is a team effort. Like, that is a huge barrier and challenge for everybody. And again, it's not something you solve once. It's part of like, how do you build a muscle so that this becomes part of everybody's work and not just one person's. So that's all I have to share right now. And I think we want to save the most of the time for really, we have a small group, but that allows us to really do hands-on work. So
I'm gonna actually maybe go off script for a second, because the group is so much smaller, at least at the moment. I just wonder, Libra, what are your thoughts? Do you want to try to do two groups, or maybe keep it all in one session, or because I think everybody's questions have been rich so far, and because the group is so small, maybe the idea is to kind of bring everybody here and kind of go from there and just start answering and going into it. What's your thought?
Yeah, we can do that. The advantage is everyone gets to hear everything, and the disadvantage is there's just less time for all the questions that may come up. So anyone have a strong feeling against just doing this all together?
It's your time, folks. So you tell, we can do, go however you like. All right, why don't we just start here? And if we need to break out, we can do that. But let's start with, Rebecca, we can start with your question around just engaging, I would say more people. I know it's specifically men, but the thing that I would offer, and then Libra can probably bounce in as well, the thing that I would offer, particularly with things like the Social Justice Committee, oftentimes people aren't clear. They don't want to get in for the long haul, right? In other words, they want to participate, but they don't want to come to endless, come to meetings and and not have a specific goal in mind and that kind of thing. So my offer to that particular question would be, really, being clear about the purpose of the committee, the goals of the committee, how long the committee will run, if there are subcommittees, what are they? And that way perhaps you'll find more entry points for people to come in. And there certainly is no harm in inviting men. I mean, just to say, hey, we would like more men in this committee for this particular reason. And so, there's no harm in that. And then kind of sharing that. Libro, did you want to add anything on that? Oh, you're mute.
Sorry, I'm muted. Yeah, I wanted to, I come out of organizing, and when I think about a challenge internally or externally, I think about it like an organizer, which is like, okay, how do we move people in the direction we're trying to move them in by understanding what their motivations are? And how do we make sure to line up people's motivations with like the program we're trying to move? And I think that in order to do that, like we first have to like really understand what motivates people. And I would say like an essential part of any sort of internal racial equity, racial justice process would be to have one-on-one conversations with all the stakeholders, really to talk to everybody and to figure out like, where are they at? Like, are they like, this is an alien idea that's being pushed on me from the top and I don't like it? Are they like, I'm committed to this, but I'm terrified that I'll be like called out or embarrassed, or am I like, yes, let's go hard? Where are people at? What motivates them? Because I think then, two things. One is you can figure out how to make the connect, like someone who's like, I feel like I'm on the hamster wheel. Like we're doing social work every week and it never ends. And like, how do we get out of this? Like, we're about ending poverty, but it feels like, this is intractable. Like that's someone who's like looking for bigger picture answers. And you can try to link their work to this process. And I think the more either people's personal motivations or their career motivations, the more we integrate this work with the overall mission and program of the organization and people's day-to-day jobs, the more effective it will be. If it's like an add-on, another thing to do, it just makes it a lot harder. So yeah, I would just say, talk to everybody, have a conversation, find 30 minutes to talk to every person, figure out where they're at, figure out, because I think then it's just so much easier later if someone isn't engaged, someone isn't participating, to be like, what's up? Have this conversation. You said you were really passionate about this. You're not here. We need you.
Yeah, and I'll follow up again, Libro, because this question's come up a lot. I know I've had a conversation with Rebecca as well about kind of engaging people and finding out what's motivating them. And organizing, we call it self-interest, listening for people's self-interest, right? And it's as simple as listening to someone say, here's what I'm concerned about, and here's what I'd like to change, and then saying, oh, well, it's interesting that you're concerned about this because we have a social justice task force that we're working on, and kind of linking it so that they can then see, oh, I can actually work out my personal motivation within this group, and that's one way to do it. So when we talk about listening, they're really called listening campaigns. We're really talking about listening for people's motivation, self-interest, and then linking it and saying, oh, okay, you'd like to work on that? Oh, or you're concerned about that? Okay, we're doing this over here. And so, but anybody else want to share anything on that? Because we're all, we're a group. So if anybody else wanted to share on that specific question around engaging more people or just engaging, men specifically. And I'm going to get to your question in a second. All right. So Mia, let me see if I can read your question that came up. How do we not scare people from how much extra work really investing in DEI will be? Well, let's see. One of the ways to do that, and I think I've kind of alluded to it earlier, is to be specific about what you are doing. I think we can all admit that this work is big and deep. And the thing that we also say is that it's not short term at all. We're in this, we're changing attitudes, we're changing focus, we're changing a lot. And that doesn't come really in a month or a year even. It's more of the work that we're beginning to transform. And so it's transformative. So it's really going back to what we talked about self-interest. People who want to do this work will want to do this work. And people who are afraid of it in that sense may just not be ready yet. So it's the idea that maybe we don't spend a lot of time trying to coax someone to do something they're not ready to do yet. That's my initial thought. If Libra wants to kind of add anything.
Just two strategies to share. One is make sure that there's different levels of engagement. Like there has to be different levels at which people engage because people have different, even someone who's committed now might be swamped later or have a personal crisis later or whatever. Like people have to be able to sort of reassess their level of investment and commitment. So if you make everything really high level, high bar of commitment, you're going to have a low level of engagement. So I think we just want to make sure that there's different levels at which people engage, even at the most basic, especially if it's a new process, so that people feel like there's a place for me somewhere in this. And the second strategy I would say is let people define what the work is. Like don't create in your office a list of all the things and then sort of force it on people. Sort of say, all right, you're in charge of this aspect of the work. What's your diversity plan? How do you see applying these values and principles to your work? And when people define the plan themselves, it's a lot harder for them to say, like, I'm not going to do that. Like someone foisted that on me or something. And that's an organizing strategy too, which is like, okay, we're all committed to this in principle. Like, what's your plan? And I think then it lets people, it checks like, do people really get it? Are they like way off in left field? Do they not understand it? But two, it lets them say like, oh, I have this creative idea that maybe you never even had. And lets them figure out, and then it's integrated in the work. It's like part of their plan. It's not added on top. It's like, okay, we really want to bake these things into the work. So anyway, those are two strategies I would say are available.
Okay.
And Mia, am I pronouncing your name correctly? Is it Mia?
Yes, you guys got it right the first time.
Good. I'm curious, and this might be helpful for the group. Do you have an example of what you're describing? That you can share? And maybe
sure. Yeah, I was going to ask if I could share where we're at on some of these things. In terms of recruitment, something we are doing, we are considering targeted recruitment of some of the more diverse members of our network. And the reason why we're doing that now, a little bit later in the process, as opposed to having an open recruitment like it was early on, to ensure the people interested in doing the work want to do the work, is because now that we're going through these conversations, these heavy, in-depth, difficult racial and marginalized groups sort of discussions, we are finding that we need more Black and brown voices to take up more space. And like, you can't just like tell all the Black and brown folks like, hey, do the extra work, we need you again. Like, really, we need to create a space that is safe for Black and brown folks when they finally do come into this space, and ensuring that that is a safe space for them, not for the white folks to feel safe saying whatever the hell they want to say in groups, you know? And like you said, making it more specific in terms of like what the group is going to be doing, or like has an agenda for what it's going to do, so that they have more confidence in coming in, that when they do voice their opinions, like it will go somewhere, right? So yeah, the specificity works. In terms of getting people on different entry levels, what we implemented was basically an online forum where, rather than using a e-list where we just blasted from our desk to the committee members and there wasn't a lot of engagement between all of them, we created a space where they could always access the agendas, they could always access the group exercises, they could engage with them offline if they had missed it, et cetera, see the notes and minutes from the other meetings they had done. My only thing is that I think a big concern is with us is that we've started implementing post surveys for these social justice committee meetings to see how people feel about how they are being run, and give them an anonymous voice to let us know like how they think it should be run in future, and have a voice in how it's being created, and etc. And there is a lot of pushback whenever we have an exercise that is like, how likely are you to engage with this exercise, or extra recommended readings, or anything like that? And lots of people just say like, I'm busy. Or when I first proposed the online engagement, I was like, listen, some people are more comfortable just writing things down because it's hard to have these conversations face to face with people, even though it's on Zoom. And maybe if they had time to sit down and think about their thoughts rather than having to spout them off, like you'll get a little bit more depth and understanding from that person writing it. And a lot of people went, I do not feel comfortable writing these thoughts online, nor do I want to do extra writing assignments. And I'm kind of like, all right, if you don't want to talk at extra group meetings and you don't want to talk online, I don't know what to tell you here. I've given you options and I'm not sure how to implement your wants and needs. But yeah, like it was a little bit of a conundrum for me on how to engage people at various levels, but also a fear that like if we did not approach it the right way or present it the right way, people would either think, A, this group is not doing anything and I'm out of here, or B, this group is too much work and I'm out of here.
Mm-hmm. So the thing I hear a lot in what you just said is organizational structure, right? So it really, to me, it raises questions about the organization and the structure and who has power and who doesn't, and so on and so forth. So hold that thought, because I'm hoping that as we move through, some of this stuff will be answered. But just to let you know, I'm hearing a lot of organizational structure syndrome in that, and we can kind of look at that later. Wanted to jump to Rebecca, because I think Rebecca, a lot of the things that you've been sharing has been around getting jump started. Do you want to share a little bit more about kind of where you are in your agency?
Yeah, I have. So I loved the various things that Libero has said so far, because they're what I tried and like kind of what I know as an organizer as best practice. And I've kind of run into like it seems like it's a specific, I don't know, like institutional culture that doesn't allow for those kinds of communication. And I'm trying to figure out, like, do I work around it? So in the sort of like having things come from the community and talking to people and having things embedded and finding out what people want and what people want to. So that was my proposal. And what I ended up being asked to do instead was basically make the plan by myself. And I sort of am like, this is not how this works. I don't actually like, this is absolutely not going to work. So I'm sort of in a position where I have a ton of experience and I know what works in community building. I mean, not I know what works, but I certainly know that me coming in as a new position to do DEI and saying this is what we're going to do is not going to work. But that's kind of the position I've been put in. And I keep trying to figure out how to get more buy-in from the leadership team to actually communicating, to actually having conversations, to actually sort of having, what I wanted to do initially was have a conversation with every employee in the organization and say, what do you think of when you hear the word equity? What do you love most about your job? How's it going? Is there anything that you think, when you hear what my job description is that you want me to think about or that you see already? That was what I wanted to do. And I got told I couldn't talk to anyone for 6 months. Mm-hmm. And so now I'm sort of like, okay, I don't know what to do in this. Like so basically what I've been doing that we sort of came to an agreement on is that I would build a resource library, which at some point we will begin to use to talk about things or something. But so that's kind of where I'm at, is this, like, I have this idea about best practices in this work, and it's really doesn't fit with the organizational structure that I'm in. And I kind of can't figure out what to move or how to move to get that to go smoother. I just am like, what I end up doing is things that I'm like, this is a terrible idea, but I guess it's the best I can do in this circumstance. Even like I figured out that writing a diversity statement and giving like a first 10 steps was going to get me somewhere. Like they wanted to see something. And I was like, okay, like what I want to do is talk to people to find out what I should build, but no. So I said, okay, let's have our first equity team meeting. I sort of said, we have to build a team. And even if the team is just the two of us, like I can write up what I think is a draft of that and we can talk about it in the team. And I got told, no, you have to send it over email. So I didn't even get to have a conversation about and I was like, this seems like a nightmare, but I can't quite figure out I can't figure out how to shift something there. And I don't know what I can try further to make that work better.
Libra, did you want to jump in on that? On just kind of, because I'm familiar with Rebecca's situation, so I don't know if you can add anything.
Yeah, well, and I would also say that not everyone has that situation, but probably everyone has something similar where there's some frustration about your ability and your power within an organization, your ability to do something. So, I would say being clear about what will be gained and lost, and to say like, okay, we can do it that way. Here's what I predict and what I see. And if we do it my way, like, here's the advantages. And I just want you to be clear that by doing it this way, like, this is the short. I don't know what else more you can do in that circumstance. Here's the thing. I think that in any kind of organization, you have formal and informal power dynamics, right? So formally, you have the director or the president or the decision makers and the supervisors who make decisions. Sometimes there's a much more active board. You have a whole set of folks who are part of governance. And like, we have to navigate that to move this work. And the fact that we're even having the discussion means that there's some level of commitment. And the question is always like, sometimes people want diversity outcomes or the appearance of equity, but they don't want to make too many changes, right? It's like, let's just do things the way we were doing, and then we'll do some diversity things around the edges, and that'll be enough. And I think, but then there's also some folks who are just like, I don't I know we have to do this, and I actually don't know what it takes. So sometimes it's just being an educator to the governance system to be like, we're not just talking about hiring a couple of people of color. We're talking about actually a process that will transform our work and make it better. I think the advantage that the CAP agencies, the CAP community has is that CAP is born fundamentally from this idea of systemic transformation. It's about the elimination of poverty. It is literally born from that idea. And I think the more the more we fit our commitments to racial justice and racial equity into the CAP language and experience and history, the more powerful it is, the more it meets. So that's the formal side. Then there's the informal power dynamics, which I think in some ways are harder, which is like organizational culture, the dynamics of the office, all these other things. It's like sometimes what we're talking about is like really uncomfortable to people, not because they disagree, but because it's like, that's not the way we do things. And I think that's something that's harder, and we have to be creative about how we approach it. Like, it's like boiling a frog, right? If you turn the heat up too high, that frog's going to jump out of the pan. So we need to raise the temperature slowly and figure out how do we boil the frog.
Thanks, Libro. And I'm kind of curious about that boiling frog analogy, but we'll come back to that. But in any case, but I think for both you, Rebecca, and Mia, it's organizational structure and organizational culture, right? And one of the strategies is to, one, go slowly. That's one, and also learn as you go. And so all the things that all the things that you're navigating, you're likely navigating them for the first time. I think everybody could probably agree with that. And just take notes and just watch how things are going and keep going and keep learning and keep growing. And that's probably the best we can offer without getting into all the specifics around hierarchy and who's all that. So I'm hoping that's helpful, just to encourage you to kind of keep your notes, keep going, and keep seeing what works and what doesn't, and figuring that out. So I wanted to kind of come back to you, Ben, but before that, I see, is it Jamie that's joined, or somebody?
Yep, sorry, joined a little late here, but it's great to see everyone.
Great. And am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Yes, it's technically Jaime, but Jamie's Jamie's perfectly fine. I'm a junior as well, so every time someone says Jaime, I'm like, that's my dad.
Okay. Well, welcome to the session. Just to kind of fill you in, we're just having conversations about diversity and equity and how do we move forward. This session is specifically about crafting action plans for diversity and equity within our community action agencies. Are you able to share a bit about your agency and your role just for the group so we know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I apologize for joining late at a meeting that ran over, but a pleasure to see everyone. I'm the Chief Impact Officer at Community Action Partnership in Lancaster County. Our agency services all of Lancaster County. It's about 300 plus employees. We're broken up in a way that's kind of focuses around impact teams or impact areas around different themes. So we have our education impact team that focuses on our Thrive the Five program, formerly known as Head Start. We have our Parents as Teachers program within that impact team. We also have a household stability team, which focuses on programs such as utility assistance, navigation services, and early learning resource center. We have a health and nutrition impact team, which has the programs WIC, SNAP-Ed, and food distribution. And then finally, our safety and empowerment impact team, which has our domestic violence services program. And then also, as recent as 3 years, we merged with our local Crispus Attucks Community Center here in Lancaster as well. So 4 main impact areas with this approach of helping families with this holistic lens here in Lancaster County. So I'm relatively new to my role. I started about almost a year in July that I've been with the agency.
Okay. Well, certainly thanks for joining. And this is a learning lab, so we're really kind of here supporting each other in the work. And we're answering specific questions or challenges that people may have, or we're actually sharing what's working. So I'm actually going to go kind of jump to Ben for a second, but if you, after Ben, want to share any particular challenge or support that's working with the group, and we can kind of talk a little about that a little bit, we'll go from there. Ben, did you want to kind of share with us again about kind of where you are and what you're hoping to do more of?
Yeah, for sure. I think so with being new to the role within the community development program of Beaver County, and being really just drawn to a lot of the CAP webinars and conversations such as this around DEI, I think really the vision and why I'm even here on these conversations is how to build a culture around integrating. I think that word integration has been really resonating with me. How do we integrate this into every part of our work here at the community development program? So really the couple benefits is, in terms of our organizational structure, is that, there's a lot of time for that one-on-one conversation to have, with other folks, and colleagues that I work with. Although there's not a lot of avenues or even structure right now to have group conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so that's the biggest kind of hang up that I'm feeling. And I hear other colleagues, even just from a general statement, expressing that, right, that there's not, just simple structures such as, organizational staff meetings, right? And, even on a monthly basis. I think it's definitely a different time for the organization because of the effects of COVID, right? And then some people being, some people working at home still hybrid, and for a whole year, no one was coming into an office. So I think now is kind of a ripe time to start to create those avenues. And so that's the big thing that I'm kind of running into, I feel, is how do we, because I have a lot of those one-on-one conversations around how do we integrate DEI into every piece of our work, but what does it look like to have a culture that's centered around it, and to help to create, really I'm just in the role to assisting in creating those avenues, and then assisting others to lead that conversation, and really just being that that person that's on the side helping to create that space.
Well, thanks for sharing that, Ben. I think the one thing that comes up for me as you were talking, and Libero can certainly add on to this, the reminder that we're not doing this work in a vacuum, right? If you understand your communities and you understand the disparities that are happening wherever you are in terms of your programming or staffing or whatever, that can be the conversation starter. It doesn't have to be an introspection about diversity, equity, and inclusion as much as it is, how do we address this particular disparity, or how do we address this particular issue in our community? And perhaps that's where we can ground people deeper into the work, so that you don't feel like you're going all the way over here to come back to what's really happening. And so as you were talking, that came up for me, and I'll let Libero kind of share a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a whole lot to add. I just think that, I think it's an opportunity, the world we live in is an opportunity. Like we don't yet, like Winzo said, we're not in a vacuum. Our organizations aren't in a vacuum. And we know that like the crises and the developments in communities impact us in positive and negative ways. And so those are opportunities too. I mean, there's a reason why these conversations are happening all over the place now, because a year ago, George Floyd was murdered, and it created, it was an ongoing crisis in our community that erupted onto the national stage in a way that was you couldn't ignore. And it also unleashed the largest social change movement in history. Something like 26% of all adults took part in protests for George Floyd. And like that created this space where everyone was like, okay, which side are you on? Are you going to let this continue? And I think that was an opportunity that we're still riding on a little bit to say like, okay, how do we actually think about our work and how it relates to the world? But it's not every day that we have these huge dramatic crises that create that moment. But there are all kinds of developments in communities that create an opening and an opportunity. And so one of the things I think we have to do better is to be aware of like what's happening in the community. What are the needs? How are they changing? What new developments are emerging? And are we living up to it? Like that to me is part of the equity challenge, is not to just to always think about like, are we meeting the need? Are we having unintentional impacts? Are we actually responding to communities? Because it's really easy for any organization, a service organization, a development organization, a community organization, a faith organization, to be stuck in like, this is just what we do, and to be out of sync with the need. And so in some ways, I think we begin with a conversation about race, but it's really a bigger conversation about like, are we actually a kind of relevant to the actual lived experience of the communities we serve? Mm-hmm. And again, that's a muscle. And any kind of institution, it's so easy to just get stuck in the thing of like, we just do what we do. We do what we do. And it's hard. It's helping people lift their head up, and get a picture of where you're at, and then make a shift.
Yeah, and this just to follow up, it's also an opportunity to just begin collecting data wherever you are in terms of your agency. That's how you can better see the picture of what's happening in your communities. And once you see that clearer picture and realize that, hey, our work into equity or our work into diversity and inclusion can help reduce some of that. That's really where the connection is, and perhaps that's where people will join in, because they can see the real impact that this work will have. And I say that both to you, Ben, as well as to Rebecca and even Mia, around creating that picture. With the idea that you're not doing this in a vacuum. There's real need and purpose for it. And the more that you can connect that, the more perhaps people will be able to kind of join in where they are. Wanted to go back to, and I didn't do the pronunciation once again. Is it, say it again. I'm gonna say Jamie, but I know that's not it.
Jamie's perfect. That's okay. Fine. Yeah.
What brought you to the meeting today? I'm just curious, and then maybe we can kind of start from there.
Yeah. So community action. I mean, I think kind of backing up a little bit. I think DEI has been something that a lot of organizations have been talking about over the past year. Our organization is no different. And how do we really make impactful change internally and externally to set the example for other organizations on how you could do this the right way. We're currently in the process of hiring a DEI consultant to help us with that work, and just having a lot of conversations. We've had a couple of trainings with our staff. We started to have these conversations around DEI, but we're definitely one of the reasons why I'm here is trying to soak up as much information as possible because we want to do it right. I think DEI is one of those things that personally I have sometimes some skepticism around other organizations to say, hey, we're doing this work because we've been talking about it for a long time and you haven't seen so much so much progress. And so we just really want to be intentional about it. My first job out of high school was actually at a bank where I received a diversity scholarship award. So this was 14 years ago, 15 years ago now that there was a diversity committee in a bank. So here we are all these years later, still talking about diversity, equity, inclusion. It's like, where are the gaps that need to be made? So we're not talking about the same thing over and over, but we're farther along in the journey than we need to be. So that's probably a long-winded way of explaining why I'm here, and but really trying to be intentional about how we implement this here at CAP.
Okay, and I'm gonna trip and fall if I have to, but you're at CAP Lancaster, right? Or
yep.
Yeah. Okay. And so and that's Vanessa and her team, right? Okay. Well, as you know, Vanessa is a leader around this work, not just in her community, but also with CAP. And so she's been doing a lot to support the work that we're doing around diversity and equity. So I know you're in good company, and I know a lot of the great work that you're doing. And so I think you shared in the beginning, a bit about the work, but for those folks like Mia and perhaps Rebecca and even Ben who are still in that area of trying to get grounded, any thoughts or things that you can offer to them that might be helpful as they get deeper and grounded in the work?
Yeah, I think so. One of the things we started with, especially with our organization, is really doing trainings around psychological safety. So really understanding that in order to have these conversations, people have to feel comfortable enough to make mistakes and comfortable enough to receive feedback at the same time. So we've really been intentional across our teams of making sure that we've created the environment where these discussions can be had. So I think there's just some of my colleagues in other organizations started jumping into this work, and it was a little rough in the beginning because there were some folks that weren't maybe as receptive as others, or there were others that wanted to move a lot faster. So really trying to gauge, like, how do we bring everyone along together on this journey, understanding that some are farther ahead than others. So psychological safety and creating that environment for that has been very crucial. Also, we've probably one of the trainings that we did in the beginning that was very helpful was around Jennifer Brown's inclusive leadership continuum. So for those who aren't familiar, she mentions a continuum around leaders being unaware around DEI initiatives, to aware, to active, and then proactive or allyship. And understanding that DEI encompasses all different types of, whether it's, LGBTQ rights, whether it's ableism or whatever it might be, we all land on different parts of the spectrum. And how do we move along the spectrum over time as we gain more education? So that was a very valuable exercise and tool that we did with our staff that I think helped ground everyone and to get started in this work.
Okay. Well, thanks for sharing that. And part of what we were going to do as we wrap up the session is to provide resources for everybody. And so we'll certainly, Jennifer Brown is actually someone that we're familiar with, obviously, because of the work that Vanessa's doing. And I will certainly share that with the group as well. But thanks for sharing that. I think we're at 3 o'clock, and because the group is small, there's no reason we can't get out early if we need to, or we can. But wanted to just make sure, as we look at where we are, how helpful has this been? Are there any lingering questions that you have that we can be helpful with? We're going to kind of move right into the resources part, but just before we do that, any other quick challenges or questions that you have or things that we can answer? All right, okay.
If there is none, Winslow, can I throw out one other thing? I think that like we've been saying, there is a lot of interest in like what is now being called diversity, equity, inclusion. DEI is like the shorthand, which has some meaning, but not a lot of meaning. It can mean different things, different people, but like there's a lot of buzz around this term DEI right now. I think one of the things that's really important for group like CAP groups and for others is that, you're not a bank. You're not a corporation. Like these groups are really interested in the appearance and the sort of the appearance of diversity and the importance of inclusion in order to maintain stability and relevance. I think that it's really, really important for CAP agencies to understand that the point is not to have really nice, diverse, beautiful communities, islands in the middle of totally devastated communities. Right? Your goal is to actually serve communities. And I think that sometimes we get into this thing where DEI is all about internal and it's not about the mission. And I think that is one pitfall to be aware of, is like, if it's not about building equity in the community, then you should pause and think about it and say, okay, are we just kind of going through the motions here? Are we actually trying to understand that we serve communities that have been devastated by poverty and systemic racism, and that is the goal, is to actually advance equity and justice in the communities. And in order to do that, we need to make sure our houses are in order, that we have inclusive workspaces, that we're committed to diversity, all these things. So it's not in and of itself. It's like we do that so that we can push that outward and be better at our work. Anyway, I just say that, not that anyone's doing that, but I think there is there can be, especially in the way some folks do DEI consulting and stuff, this thing that it's very much about, making sure you get sort of, well-spoken people of color from Ivy League schools hired in, and it isn't really about transforming the work.
Right. I think that's well said, Libro. Thanks for sharing that. And I wind up I'm motivated every day because I get to help you all do the work that you do. So that's my motivation. It's my way of saying, here's how I'm working in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space to transform communities. And so when you think about it that way and be mindful that that's what's motivating the work, I think that makes it a lot better. Leslie, thanks for sharing that video from Jennifer Brown. Let's move. I think if we don't have any more questions, I wanted to just kind of go right into some resources that we're going to share as we wrap this session up. One of them, I'm going to share a couple of things from that we're doing at CAP. We are doing a monthly newsletter on diversity, equity, inclusion, and it includes a number of the things that we talk about here, and we get into topics around thinking about critical race theory and all the things that we're doing. So if you're not, I think everybody's kind of connected to it, but I'll be sure Make sure we have your email address if you want to throw it in the chat. And if you're if you want to share that as well. We are also at CAP working on learning modules for diversity and equity inclusion in terms of how do we address equity and things like that at our agency. So that's another thing we're doing. In September, we're having a larger conversation statewide on community action conversation on social justice. So that's coming up at the end of September to keep an eye on, as well as doing a number of resource sharing that we do with the agency. As you all may know, we have an ad hoc equity committee with CAP that encompasses many of the community action agencies across the state. And so we're actually leveraging that think tank to help us do this work across the state as well. And so those are some of the resources that we have. I'm actually going to share at the end of this meeting, we were able to put together what we call a DEI checklist. And it's a series of questions that you can answer or you can ask as you begin to sit down and think about, how do I craft an action plan? So we'll share that as well as a resource that might be helpful for you. And then I know at the top of the chat, Libro put in a link to some other resources that we wanted to share with you. Libro, did you want to share a little bit about that link?
Sure. I just added 2 links to the chat. The first one is just a list of some resources out there for racial equity, racial justice, developing action plans. These are some of the groups that I find are the most useful or adept. There's a lot of stuff out there, some of which is not that useful and some of which is more. I find that racialequitytools.org is a great site that just collects lots of stuff. You all may have seen that site before, and they generally do a good job. The 2 groups, the other Institute for Othering and Belonging out in California with John Powell, I think has some great resources and frameworks. They focus on equity issues, mostly targeted universalism and other concepts. And I know that National CAP does a lot of work with John around belonging. And then Race Forward is an organization which I worked for many years, which has great resources on systemic racism and they also house the Government Alliance on Racial Equity, which helps government agencies develop equity plans, which could actually be helpful for you all. And also it's a great way to figure out how to partner with government, because sometimes there's overlapping. And then the second link is actually my personal listing of books and things like that. Dan, you can't access it? Which one?
The second one.
Oh, okay. I
request access.
Yeah, let me change that.
Okay. Yeah, so these are we'll actually provide when Leslie does a wrap-up email and sends out to everybody, we'll include all of these resources so that you can have them. And again, these are all to really just help you as you're moving through. The one question that I thought to ask, and Libro, when you finish looking at your site, I had asked Libro the question, and I'll bring it up here because it might be relevant to where you all are. I was asking him, if he had an example of an action plan that he might reference, right? And there was some hesitancy about that because you'll wind up seeing action plans like you mentioned from the big corporations and the big banks, and they're really elaborate and our agencies are smaller and we're never going to get to that. But really wanted to give you a sense of what it could look like from the community action perspective. And I know Rebecca and I talked about that a little bit. And so, Libro, can you share a little bit about, kind of setting some expectations about what an action plan at several agencies could look like, and answering questions like where would it be housed, and is it part of the strategic plan? Is it not part of, that kind of thing? Maybe share a little bit about that.
Yeah, and I think I'm gonna have to share that book list separately because for some reason I can't change the sharing access on it, but I'll make sure that Leslie has it so she can send it.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think some people are like, give me the template. Like, I want the template so we can do the thing. And I really hesitate because I think the plan has to make sense for you. And sometimes a lot of the plans, like if you search online, a lot of the plans are like from these big organizations, like giant philanthropic, nonprofits and whatever. And like they're huge. Like they're not something that small agencies can do, and they take huge resources. And the other thing is sometimes they're just purely symbolic. They're just like, we are going through all the checklist of the things and doing the right things and putting it on our website so you know that we're doing the right thing. To me, I think when I work with like a local community organization, we're like, a plan should be part of your overall plan, right? It should not be a separate thing. It should be something that's integrated. You can pull it out to share it or to whatever, but it should be part of your work, and it should be part of everybody's work plans, right? And it should be something that's within the realm of possibility. It has to be something you can achieve, even if it's a stretch. Like if it's just like pie in the sky, ambitious stuff, like it is, at the end of the year, you're going to be like, we didn't achieve any of these things, and people will just be frustrated, et cetera. So the other thing is, I'm always for like taking steps on the path rather than trying to run to the goal. Like, figure out like what's that benchmark you can get to, and also build on your strengths. Sometimes people do the opposite. They're like, let's start where we're worst. And I'm like, okay, yes, there are sometimes huge problems in organizations that have to be addressed, but you also have to acknowledge your strengths and build on them, because sometimes those huge problems will take a while to dismantle. So I would say like, it has to be something that identifies some objectives. It is not abstract. Like you could use something like SMART goals to identify like where you're going, and it should be part of people's plans, their action plans. And what I said before is true too. Like people should set their own equity plans. Like every part of the organization that makes a plan for the year should have equity goals, have equity, whatever it is. And it could start with like, we're going to learn what equity is. We're going to study this. We're going to identify like things we don't know. We're going to make relationships with organizations we don't currently have relationships with. It doesn't have to be like, and in fact, it shouldn't be like, we're going to eliminate, racism, because you ain't going to do it. So I would say that, and think about it as a muscle to be flexed. It's like something that you build into the work so that it, every individual, every department, everything is thinking about it in a new way, reporting on it, which forces people to have conversations they're not used to having, and that it's integrated with the work. So it's not just like a parallel thing that people can ignore, but something that's built in that they must report on and discuss. And it's challenging because you have to create an environment that is both challenging and supporting. I'm going to quickly share something real quick here on my screen. I don't know if people are familiar with this concept, but when you're in the comfort zone, you can't learn. You don't learn when things are easy and comfortable. But when you're in the freak out zone, you also can't learn. When you're bombarded, overwhelmed, feel attacked. And so like our goal is to get people in that learning zone. That's the zone where there's tension, where there's agitation, where you're being stretched and forced to do things you wouldn't normally do, but not so much that you're just freaked out. And I think sometimes these conversations about race in particular, they're all in the freak out zone. We put the pedal to the metal, we push everyone to the freak out zone, and then we wonder why people aren't ready. So we're not saying we don't want to push people. We do want to agitate. We do want to challenge them, but not so much that they freak out. And I think that's true too when you make your plans.
Right.
We want people to succeed.
So I'll share something that I heard yesterday, and particularly as it relates to community action. And the saying goes, if you've seen one community action agency, you've seen one community action agency, right? So the idea is all of your communities are different, and the idea is to navigate those communities as they are. But I can say, based on what we've heard today, that all of you are on the right track. All of you are doing the right things to keep going. And hopefully this session encouraged you to keep going and do more. Hopefully we provided some insights and resources that will be helpful for you. I'll emphasize it again, go slowly, learn as you go, and take lots of notes. I hesitate to say journal because that's more disciplined, but for those folks who want to journal, it's probably a good thing. And then just really keep this work going. We're going to be in this for the next few decades, or maybe even the next century. So this is the long haul. We're changing. We're doing transformative work, and it doesn't happen overnight. Anything we want to wrap up before I turn it over to Leslie to kind of close us out in terms of surveys and things? Any other quick questions?
I just want to thank everyone for coming to participate, and you did participate. Mia, I'm glad that you joined us from New York. Hopefully you and Winslow will work together and we can get something going here. Glad for that. So nice job, Libro and Winslow.
Thank you.
I think you put together a very good program here.
Good.
Well,
So I might
thanks
be
everyone,
biased,
and yeah, hit us up if you have thoughts afterwards or things you forgot.
All right, Leslie, you want to close us out?
I will. I did want to just say thank you again to everybody for coming, because just by coming, you're being part of the solution, right? So being here is what we need. We need to have you here so we can have the important talks. Thank you to Winslow and Libro. You guys are fantastic. It was a great interactive conversation. I enjoyed listening to it. So I will send a post email that has the recording once it's ready. It will have the list of all the stuff we just threw at you, the links, the book list. I have all of it ready to go. So that will be sent out to you. And then we will probably be planning another one in the fall. Is that right, Winslow?
Well, I will stay connected to folks. We had a, I want to make sure we still have energy around this. So, well, I can just ask a question here for folks who are here. If we did something, if we did a follow-up to specifically action planning around DEI in the fall, would you all welcome that?
Any thumbs ups?
Thumbs ups? Okay. All right, great. So so look for that, and I'll touch base with some other folks and see where the energy is, and maybe we can make it even more specific than today, so that we can be energized and keep the momentum going.
Can bring their draft equity plans, and we can workshop.
Yeah, and that's the goal. Yeah. So, but yeah, thanks, Leslie.
Sorry to preview that.
No, that's okay.
Okay, great. Well, I'll get you guys everything you need. Again, thanks for coming. Otherwise, I hope everybody has a great day.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Leslie.
Thanks,
Of
Leslie.
course.
Yeah.